out there. As we get older, we'll start to lose mental competence for whatever reason. And I'm certainly not an expert on psychology or the aging brain or anything like that, but I pick up stuff here and there just like we all do. One of the things I'm told is you should always turn your phone off. Okay, that was the boss. I'm sure she will forgive me. I could tell you interrupted me. Anyhow, they say one of the first things that a person starts to lose is their judgment, which that seems to make sense. Most of us can keep, and I've heard that one of the last things we start to use is social skills. I've seen this in our office where somebody might be in one place or another on the decline mentally, and it's not immediately apparent because they're responding appropriately, may not be understanding anything we say that we're talking about with them and their family members, but you would think they were. So that's another thing. So often it's difficult to know when somebody's starting to decline. And when that's happening, if protective measures can be put in place sooner rather than later, you're much better off. And for example, I tell people, and I hope I don't change my mind, that when I feel myself starting to decline more, then I will do some of these things myself, especially one of the last things I'll talk about that I will be doing. It has to be done ahead of time while I still am willing to cede some control over my personal affairs to others in an irreversible fashion, so that I can't go change it back. That happens sometimes. For example, if somebody grants you a power of attorney, so you can control their affairs, and they just go out to the boats and run out their credit cards anyhow. You can't stop them. The power of attorney, you do not control that person. So the idea is to try to put protective measures in place for your loved ones, for yourselves. Abuse can come from relatives, can come from acquaintances, can come from new best friends, gambling, which I've already mentioned. And speaking of the people who are like new best friends, there's a real industry out there, very widespread, of people who are trying to steal other people's inheritances, trying to take advantage of people. Maybe not steal from them immediately, but when they die and leave a will, guess who's left out? Everybody but the new best friend. And the best scam I've ever heard of was a Russian group in New York City would find elderly widowers and introduce them to very attractive Russian immigrants, female immigrants who would come over, young, in their 50s, very young. And of course they get to know them, cozy up to them, and eventually marry them. Wow. Now, once somebody's married, that spouse has tremendous control, has first preference in all kinds of things legally. Very difficult to get anything done about it. Of course, here's this old elderly gentleman married to somebody 20, 30, 40 years younger than him. And who's he gonna believe and who's he gonna mind? He's gonna mind her, of course. Not only is she the wife, but she is this young, real attractive wife by design. So, and then often, by the time the elderly gentleman would pass away, she's gone. You can't try to file a lawsuit against her. She's gone with everything because she had him sign it all over while he was still alive. Didn't leave until he died. But so she took care of him as promised. But so that was a very successful scam. Things like that, a lot of that out there. You have to try to put an end to it. We have found that often when surprising, I've had some of my lady clients pass away, and we thought they had modest estates, nothing big. But what we also found out was they didn't have such modest credit card debt. And to our astonishment, it's mind-blowing, that credit card debt was at the boats. They'd go out there, spend all the money they had, and use the credit cards for the boats. People I never thought. When I first met them, I never believed that would be their fantasy once the husband was gone. Of course, the guys, Bridget and I very well know a client who's since passed away, who when he was elderly, about my age, but in fact he was a little younger when he started this, he had alcohol-induced dementia. His father had a trust fund set up for him because he knew this son was not real. He was sort of wild. I've been a lawyer and a judge even, but he was on the wild side. And he discovered, Katrina chased him up here. He's in an assisted living facility, and he discovered that if he would have somebody drive him out to the boats and he'd flash his cash, there were young 50-somethings out there looking for people like him. And they were happy to meet. And he was delusional, of course. He thought these women were serious about him. He had at times up to 3 or 4 fiancées at a time. And of course, he was being taken advantage of. Fortunately, his father had left his assets in a trust. We were managing his personal affairs because we were hired to do that, but the bank was the trustee, and we were closely with the bank. He was taken care of, and this money lasted where he was able to stay in an assisted living instead of nursing home until he just about ran out of money. That's when he finally passed away. So his life, instead of being miserable, because he was just not suited for a nursing home, he lived out his 100 years well because his father had protected him ahead of time. Bank accounts, they can be dangerous, as you know. If I'm going senile, whatever term you want to use, and I'm a widower, and I'm looking for companionship, the female type, of course, and have free access to my accounts, my IRA, whatever, maybe mortgage my house, whatever it takes to keep my companion happy. Bank accounts can be a big problem. Can be relatives getting into the bank account. A person who has money in a bank account, if they come up with a big debt, of course they can be sued for that, if they have a debt. You have to, and how do you keep somebody from accessing their own money? I mean, you really can't do that. You can't just say, I'm sorry, you can't have your money. I'm going to control it for you. So you can't legally do that. But once they reach the point where they are far enough gone, cannot remember everything, you maybe it's with a power of attorney, maybe with that person, set up a new account and start transferring the Social Security checks and so forth to that account. Not give the person a checkbook and sort of just hope we forget about that account. Then you, as a caretaker, control that account, pay all the bills. The person has no credit card. We'll talk about it, replace an alternative to a credit card in a minute here. So he gets a telephone call. He or she gets a telephone call. Says, sure, I'll be happy to go get these gift cards or whatever. And they have no access to the money. But they can't do it. But they do sign up for something where there's a big debt they owe somehow. If somebody is foolish enough to lend them money somehow, well, they can't get to the money to pay it back, and the scam is revealed. Power of attorney, we mentioned that already. The power of attorney is an extremely important document, sometimes the most important document, often more important than a will for people of modest means especially. There's a lot of misconceptions about a power of attorney. If I sign and say I give Bridget my power of attorney, say she can do anything under the sun for me, that doesn't mean she can now make decisions for me. She can't drive me over to a nursing home and admit me. I still got some say about that. I can say, I don't want to do this. I got the power of attorney. A lot of misconception about that. Once had a client call me, her daughter, his daughter had his power of attorney. She was not letting him back into his house, into his apartment, because he had the power of attorney. Police were called, and the police came, and the daughter said, I've got his power of attorney. I don't have to let him in. And the police looked at it and said, I suggest you call a lawyer. This is a civil matter. totally wrong. That power of attorney didn't give her authority to do anything he didn't want done. To cancel it, she just has to say, it's canceled. He just had to tell her, it's canceled. Ideally, he would have done it in writing too, but there's no authority at all. These are not irrevocable. In fact, you cannot make a power of attorney irrevocable except in certain business situations that really don't apply to any of us. So that's, you can't use that power of attorney to force your loved one into a nursing home. What happens is often they don't know that and people just take them to the nursing home anyhow, and often by the time they're at that point they just say, well, you have to stay here, Mom. Mom complains about it, doesn't like it, but she stays because that's what her kids are telling her she has to do. Hopefully that's the best decision, and they're looking out for Mom, not for themselves somehow. But a power of attorney does not take away your powers. We often have people that are very disinclined to sign that power of attorney. They're afraid they're going to turn something over to their daughter or their son that, oh, now they're going to tell me what to do. Can't do it. They're still in charge. Bank accounts are a problem too. It's nice to be a co-signer on a bank account so you can get quick access to Mom's money. But what if the wrong person is the co-signer? It doesn't work well. And sometimes there's confusion about a bank account with a co-owner on it. Say my mother was still alive and was Ida or Joe on that bank account. Ida passes away. Does that mean that money is mine? Not in Louisiana, unless I was also named as beneficiary of that account, which requires an extra step. While Mom's alive, if we try to put her into a nursing home, it's time to qualify for Medicaid. That account is in my name. It's her money, but she put it in my name too. Both names are on it. Interest has been reported under my Social Security number. Medicaid doesn't care about that. That's her money. She put it into the account. That's a misconception. Putting a co-owner on it does not make that person the owner or the originator of the money. But also a co-signer or co-owner on an account can abuse that bank account. Give them direct access to the money. Sometimes that abuse doesn't immediately show, but later on it does when they think the person can get away with it. There can be forgeries. People can use the power of attorney to get access to a bank account, although banks are getting sort of strict about that. They often want to hear from the person, not just from the person that drops by with the power of attorney. So sometimes when we need to use them for an account, it's very difficult to have the bank recognize them. But those are problems, and there is a way around that problem. I'll discuss in just a moment. And credit cards. Oh geez, credit cards can be a problem. Mom gets a credit card. Somebody calls her on the telephone and says, we have a warrant for your arrest that's going to be served because you haven't paid your taxes for 3 years now. And if you don't pay your taxes right now, we're going to send the deputies coming to arrest you. Terrified. She believes this. And over the telephone, credit card transaction is done and that money's gone. Never be seen again. Once had a client who was a businessman in Baton Rouge, very competent engineer. Kids knew nothing was wrong with him. Remember I talked about how judgment is the first thing to disappear? They found out something was wrong when he talked to his kid the other kid and said, look, I made a big mistake. I've lost $400,000. There's these people from Nigeria that sent me some emails, and I guess they took advantage of me. That's the first time they knew something was wrong. He gave them personally, I don't remember if it was a credit card, bank account, whatever, but they got the money and were gone with it forever. Or credit card is a problem. So you have Mom walled off from her bank account. But now she has that credit card, why don't you just use it? It's as good as cash. If it's a debit account, debit card, it's even worse. Because it's very difficult, as you know, to go challenge those transactions after the money's already out of the account. It's going to take time, quite a while, before the money can come back. But let's say it's a credit card. You might be able to stop some of these bogus charges before they go through if you notice them quickly enough. Might not be able to. The others use phone scammers, internet scammers. There is something called a TrueLink card. This is actually a debit card by this outfit. They started this off for people with special needs who were beneficiaries of special needs trusts. Like somebody with an auto injury, a child with a brain injury, never be able to be competent. They have this big settlement going into that trust. Well, now they want some financial freedom. You can't just give them a credit card, because that could ruin their eligibility because they won't use it right. They will use it in such a way that they no longer qualify for Medicaid or for SSI or for the nursing home care if they're still in a nursing home. So this card has limitations on it that you put on it. For example, can't be used for gambling. Can't be used for jewelry. Maybe for an ATM up to a certain amount, like perhaps like $10 at a time or $20 at a time, something like that. A limit for a month. Limits the type of transactions. They're very flexible, very, very encouraging. I printed out from their website, TrueLink. TrueLink. I just printed this out from the website if anybody wants to take a look at this. There's just one copy here, but anybody who wants to look at it when we're done can have a look at it. Fascinating and very, very beneficial. That way, mom cannot use that credit card for anything that's not authorized. And the approach is taken, these are the things approved, nothing else will work. You don't have to have a list a mile long of things that are not approved, but just the things that are approved. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to avoid fraud. Now sometimes, a true story, I had a client years ago, a banker brought this client to me. He was an elderly man, again, probably about my age. I was young, a lot younger then. Elderly are still somebody else, that's still somebody, you know. There's some young people in here, and we're different from you, aren't we? You're not like, it's like you were different races or something. You will convert if you have any luck. That's hard to get used to. And like somebody said, I just didn't realize it would happen so fast. But this gentleman came in with the bank who was very concerned about him. His wife had died just a week or two before. She was an iron lady. She was elderly herself, ill, but she had this force of personality. The only relatives were her nieces and nephews, who were not the nicest bunch of people in the world, not the kind of people you'd want hanging around with somebody who's vulnerable. In fact, one of them was in prison at the time. When he got out, he turned out to be a big problem. All of them were bad. Put it simply, they're just bad. But they were very nice to their aunt because they knew she was wealthy by their standards. And they also knew she was strong. She wouldn't put up with any lip from them. And they were probably afraid of the inheritance and all that. So they obeyed her. But the husband was a very mild-mannered person. I think he was probably below average in intelligence, but you couldn't tell for sure. He could speak well enough, but is very, very meek and mild. And this banker knew that her client would be taken advantage of by these nieces and nephews as soon as they could get to him. So the thought occurred to me, well, let's set up a special kind of trust to help protect this guy. Now, what is a trust? That's something, when I was a kid, I don't know when I got rid of this conception, when somebody said trust, I thought of a banker downtown behind a big desk with a three-piece suit on. When you said trust, that's what came to my mind. That was as far as it went. Trusts are totally misunderstood by most people. A trust is just an arrangement created by law. It's because the legislature said this is what a trust is gonna be, and these are the rules that govern it because of law. All states have it, not all countries, surprisingly. Many countries and all of the states have it. It is a relationship where one person administers property that belongs to somebody else. Now, there are also other terms, more informal terms for trust, like a child's assets are controlled by the parent. In a sense, that's a relationship of trust, of course, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something more formal. I'm the trustee of a few trusts. It's not a position I look for. I don't go out trying to say, hey, I'll be your trustee. It's when there seems to be no other alternative for those clients. That's right, I'm the bottom of the choices. But this other person controls money that belongs to somebody else. Now, I can set up a trust for myself if I want to. If I'm going to be a beneficiary of the trust, there's really no protection from me, especially if I'm the trustee. I can get to that money anytime I want to. Why would I set up a trust like that I can change anytime I want to? A revocable trust, or revocable, if you prefer to say it that way. Well, people have the idea, well, I can avoid probate. I know when I die, I got this house in my name, and to get it in my kid's name, we'll have to file a succession, probate. And a judge will sign an order that says, okay, now it's in the kid's names. Well, what if when I die, I don't have that house in my name? Instead, it's in the name of this fictitious trust I set up. For me, I'm the trustee, I'm the beneficiary, except when I die, then the kids step in. Well, now I don't have that house in my name, so we don't have to go through probate. That's one use for a so-called living trust. It doesn't become a real trust until I pass away. It becomes irrevocable, and my kids are the beneficiaries at that point. Well, that's not too helpful to me if I'm looking at these problems like we've been talking about. What is helpful to me, and this is something I will do one day if I see it coming, and I don't wait too long before I deny it's coming, which can happen, I will set up a trust where I place my assets in this trust. How do I do that? The bank account, my checking account. I just go to the bank and say, this is going to be in a trust account now. And then my social security number, because I'm the only one that can get income from it. It's still my property. I'm the beneficiary of this trust. But this is what I call a, quote, gatekeeper trust. That's not a real technical term. If you look up gatekeeper trust on the internet, you're not going to find it, unless by chance you run into some arcane thing I wrote one day. I don't know how it would be there. You probably got into some of my personal files that way. But gatekeeper trust, like I did with this gentleman. He put everything into, put all of his assets into the trust, including we did a deed to his home, to put his home into the trust. The bank in that case was the trustee. And oh, were they great with him. It was actually Argent Trust, I believe. It wasn't the bank, it was Argent Trust. They really lost money with this guy because they took such good care of him. But they were the trustees. He had the ability to change this trust anytime he wanted to amend it. But the gatekeeper had to agree he could do it. Otherwise, it was not a good amendment. It wouldn't work. And that amendment, that gatekeeper, had to let him change the trust, amend it any way he wanted to, if he was competent and nobody was pushing his buttons. There were plenty of button pushers out there. That was what the fear was. And he stayed competent up until he passed away. Again, he wasn't exceptionally smart, but he was competent and knew what was going on. Oh, thank goodness that was done, because they did come after him. They could not get his money because he wasn't in control of it, the bank was. The Social Security check, everything went to this account in the name of this trust that the bank controlled. So they were able to pay his bills. They were able to pay for caretakers for him. There was enough money there for caretakers for the rest of his life, which runs into a lot of money when you have 24-hour caretakers. At one point, one of his nieces came in to take care of him. Well, I recall going there with meeting the banker and somebody from the Elderly Protective Services. And she walked in, and told the niece who was sitting there, you know, the first thing I noticed when I walked into this home was I smelled urine. That's a sign of elder abuse. You know? Oh, you know, okay, that makes sense. She's really not taking very good care of him. So they sort of ran her out and got a paid person to come in to take care of him. But before she was gone, she did manage to get a credit card in his name. It was a forgery. He didn't sign on it, she did. And she went and ran up a lot of things. But she was eventually prosecuted for that. That's the type of people that would have just wiped him clean. And he'd have been off in a nursing home instead of in his beloved home. All that it was home to him, and he didn't want to leave. He was protected. I've used that successfully for several clients now. And will use it myself, like I said. I don't know who I'm going to make the trust, who would be the gatekeeper. I don't think I want my kids to be the gatekeepers there. No, they would probably be excellent. Actually, they might be too lenient, so they would not be good choices. They'd have trouble turning down Dad if Dad wanted to get some money out of that so he could go out to the boats and meet some of these young 50-somethings. But that could affect my relationships if they found out I didn't have access to my own money, wouldn't it? It might not be such a great idea after all. But that's a very, very effective means. Now, this gentleman I was talking about, I told you we put his house into the trust also. That was just a deed where he signed it, saying it's now in the trust. It was filed at the courthouse, and the trust was now the quote owner. Really, he was still the owner, equitably, but it was in the name of this trust. So the legal title, as they call it, was in the name of the trust. He was still the equitable owner because he was the beneficiary of that trust. It was all for his benefit. I got a call from an attorney saying, "Hey Joe, I got this. We're going to be closing on a mortgage tomorrow. Mr. Smith wants to mortgage his home, and I looked up the deed records. I see that it's been deeded to a trust, and you were the attorney. You notarized that deed. Can you tell me what this is all about?" And I said, "A mortgage?" And he said, "Yeah, he's taking out a mortgage." I said, "Play hell." He is not. He's not taking out of the bank. He's not going to sign for that mortgage. That nephew that had been in prison was going to he was going to go around the horn, get him to borrow money on his house and get the money that way. That was that nephew who was behind that. Wow. Very protective. In fact, he went into the trust company and tried to tell them, "My uncle's going to wants to change his trust to leave everything to me. I want you to sign off on that." And I said, "Well," I took him off in another room. I said, "You really want to do this?" And he said, "Heck no, I'm just scared of him." They ran him off. I think one time they had to call the police because he was raising such a fuss. And I've used that for other people too, where sometimes wonderful caretakers in the family and felt they were therefore entitled, even though they were being paid, they were entitled to everything, and it just couldn't be done. I recall getting 2 calls from attorneys. The caretaker, the niece, had taken her aunt, who had done this before, off to another state, and some bank was the trustee and the gatekeeper. And the attorneys would talk to me about it, and I would explain, "No, she can't do it, blah, blah." I could tell by their tone something about it over the phone. They were quite tickled that this niece could not get her aunt to change her trust. They were happy to hear that, these other attorneys. Of course, they were representing the niece, so they couldn't say that. But they didn't really like it themselves. Something else I want to add about that trust, I've forgotten. It just went through my mind. Any questions on those aspects, on anything we've said so far? Any problems you could think of that might? Yes, ma'am.
I do. On the durable power of attorney, because of my husband's situation, we have the right to make all those decisions, and he signed it as best he could. Talking to him, you wouldn't know necessarily that something was wrong with him.
Yeah.
But he has no control over any of that, and never has in the family. So, I mean, is durable power of attorney for his decision-making legal?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely, yes.
make sure it's right.
As long as he's not objecting.
He's good.
Now, what happens when somebody, you do have the power of attorney, but they're out of control? They're doing dumb things. Like the client whose 3 daughters suddenly became horrible people because her best friend from grade school told her they were, because she was trying to worm her way into her life. You know, it's amazing. Once somebody starts to decline, everybody knows, I mean, everybody, that people out there know that there's a victim, and they will show up quickly. Maybe neighbors, family members, friends, strangers, but it's like they're like sharks scenting blood in the water. They just know, and they show up. So they have to be taken care of. So, but a power of attorney is very good in a situation like that, where he can't make his own decisions. He trusts you for it, as he should, and everything is fine. But what about when the person who's granted the power of attorney starts to go out of control? Somebody else taking advantage of him, becoming hostile. Like one poor old fellow got his rifleman was right behind the curtains waiting for the postman because he knew he was trying to invade the home. Horrible. He could not make his own decisions any longer, and with power of attorney, technically, he's still competent because the judge hasn't said he's not. So in that case, what's called an interdiction has to be filed, where mom or dad, let's say dad, we pick on guys a lot, dad is sued by somebody in the family, saying you're incompetent, you can't handle your own affairs, and I want to be your curator, guardian, put in charge of your affairs. Presuming that goes through and the judge agrees, he's entitled to an attorney to represent him. The judge agrees. Now he has lost his civil rights. He cannot make his own decisions. If it's a total interdiction, then it's financial, health care, personal care, everything. Somebody else has total control over him. He can be forced into a nursing home. He can have his finances taken out of his hands if he doesn't want to cooperate. And that's, it's a painful thing to go through. It's rather expensive. You're lucky if it's contested, you're lucky, very lucky if the fees are less than $5,000. He hires an attorney who gets up there and does the best he can to represent his client. And especially if there's any question about whether it's that level of competence or not. You can run into $10,000, $20,000 of attorney fees easily. Attorneys, work by the hour, and we can't control the hours. We can't go in and say with the hour, if we're going to prepare a deed or a trust or something like that, we're in control of the time. You use the flat fee. But where there's that uncertainty about what's out there, it has to be hourly. And litigation is just, if it is actually contested, it's horrible. If it's uncontested because it's just so clear. Say, for example, the husband is in a nursing home, pretty much unresponsive, doesn't really know what's going on. Or like the lady we visited one day who I tried to ask her some questions. We hoped she could sign a power of attorney for Medicaid planning purposes. And she started singing to her baby, a little doll she had. She could not sign a power of attorney. And she had to be interdicted, declared incompetent. And due to a change in the law now, let's switch a little bit to Medicaid planning. And just tell me when I need to bring it to a halt. I don't know.
We adjourn at 1 o'clock, but I want to
Okay.
make sure there's plenty of time for question and
Okay,
answers too.
An important thing is, for most of us, is Medicaid planning. Is there anybody here is writing a will to leave their inheritance to the government? I didn't think so. No. I've heard of that happening, but I've never personally seen it happen. Well, one of the things we want to do is preserve what we've got, use it for ourselves and our spouse, as it should be, but when we're both gone, I know for me and most of you, if not all of you, it's extremely important that it goes to the kids. we want them to have it. They're gonna, in most cases, they're gonna need it. You know, most families are paycheck to paycheck. Most young people are paycheck to paycheck. Student loans, high rent, wages that aren't good enough. You can have a fairly decent job and still just be paycheck to paycheck. That's the way I was for several years, after becoming a lawyer, by the way. So it's very important to us that we allow what we have worked so hard for and accumulated throughout the years, that it goes to our children to help them out, maybe the grandchildren, even whatever. One good way to lose that all is to go into a nursing home and have to pay those nursing home fees, which now exceed $6,000 a month. For most of us, that's gonna run through our savings surprisingly quickly. It's gonna be gone. That's $72,000 a year. Say somebody has $500,000, you might give them a little over 5 years. Of course, the fees will be going up. So you might be lucky to get 5 years of care. If somebody's in a nursing home for any period of time, or even a shorter period of time, but it takes a big chunk out. So what if a person might die before they're totally broke, but they have much less than they had? Medicaid planning is really important for most people. And since we have a little time, I'd like to get into a little bit of that too. The way I like to do that is put my estate plan up on this whiteboard. We have a husband, and we have a wife. Not a very pretty wife there. Much better, okay. Okay, husband and wife. My will leaves to my wife the stuff. That's the cars, the household goods, the family pictures, photo albums, all the stuff. But my half of the house, because my wife has her half. If I die first, she has her half of our community property assets. And my one half of the cash goes to a trust in my will. We have 2 sons down here. The trustee, this is after my death now, because this is in my will. What it does is give me, instead of a 3 or 4 page will, give me like a 14, 16 page will, something like that. Most of it is language about the trust document. All the rules of the trust are in there. Because in my will, it doesn't even exist when I sign this document. All that trust language, who's gonna be the trustee, means nothing because I'm not dead. When I die, my will has effect and this trust pops into existence. There it is. Nobody knows until my wife takes all this to the bank and gets accounts changed and so forth. My half of the house, we go through a succession. My half of the house is transferred to this trust. That's filed the judgment of possession at the end of an estate succession. The judge signs something called a judgment of possession that says who now possesses or owns my share of the property. That's filed at the courthouse. If it has real estate, which it will, it's also going to go in the conveyance or deed records. Now officially, my wife owns half of that house. This trust owns the other half. So she's in charge of it. Income goes to wife. She also has something called the right of invasion. Which means if her own income is not enough to support her, and she runs out of her share of the cash, then she can start taking cash out of this trust, not just the income, but just go in and start taking cash out on an as-needed basis. But nobody can force her to do that. Like Medicaid. Medicaid cannot force her to do that. So this is a great first step for a Medicaid plan, we have what we call the loving wills, where husbands and wives leave everything to each other. That is often not a good idea at all. Because what you've done, if I did that, I would take all of my assets and pile them up over here. If my wife needed a long-term stay in a nursing home, now she's got twice as much to deal with before she qualifies for Medicaid. Much easier if this half is never even counted by Medicaid. By the way, this cannot be done with a living trust. If you set the trust up while you're alive, it doesn't work. If she can get the benefit out of it, Medicaid will say, go get it. Just because of a fluke in the law, it says, in a trust, in a will. Not sure why they did that, and they've had a good reason. It might have just because they weren't thinking of living trusts. But if it's a trust in a will, this money cannot count against her, even though she has access to it. But, you know, as a single person, Medicaid will start to pay for her nursing home only when she's down to $2,000 of countable assets. These assets are not countable. So in the trust, they don't belong outright to her. I've tied them up with all these conditions. So later on, when she passes away, we know this is going to be there for the kids in a trust. And incidentally, my trust does not terminate when my wife also dies. It goes on indefinitely. It'll last until the kids have spent all the money. You know, a couple of weeks. It will last until they have spent the money. And they have long-term protection also. It's been surprising to me how often, when the second parent dies, mom and dad are there and the second parent dies and all the kids come in to do the succession and so forth. And they say, well, when can we terminate that trust? I said, well, let's talk about that. I don't try to tell them what to do, I'm just laying out the options for them, of course. Typically, the kids are the trustees. Like in my case, my boys are gonna be the trustees once my wife can't handle it, or until when she passes away, they'll be their own trustees. I said, well, you know, as long as that money is in this trust, it's safe. If you have a car wreck and a $10 million judgment against you, they can't take anything out of this trust. But if you dissolve the trust, put it in your own bank account, you're gonna lose it. If you go bankrupt for some reason, then you're gonna lose it, unless it's in this trust. You will sometimes hear people say that you don't need to worry about a trust, you don't have enough money, that's for rich people. That can almost be insulting, I think. To each of us, our financial universe is what we've got. It doesn't have anything to do with anybody else, anybody who thinks that's good or not to have a trust. This can be very protective. Another true life example, had one like this. It was just the father, they'd been divorced. He had some medical problems back before Obamacare, didn't have very good insurance, and by the time he passed away, we had to sell his house. I was the executor and the trustee of that trust. Had to sell his house, pay off his medical debts, and there was $12,000 left for his 2 children. Not much, but that's just the way it was. Not a wealthy family. Although he'd done pretty well until he got sick. His son came in, I wrote him a check for his $6,000. His daughter came in, I said, I'm not gonna write you a check. I was the trustee, I had the ability to withhold the money. I'm not giving you your money. She was happy because she and her husband had filed a Chapter 13 bankruptcy about a year before. It was going, she had 2 more years of that bankruptcy. If that trust had not been there to catch and intercept her $6,000, the check would have been written to the bankruptcy trustee. She couldn't have had it. And again, she and her husband were paycheck to paycheck, but they needed that money. And when the bankruptcy was over, called her in, wrote her check for $6,000. They were very happy. First thing they did was take their child, their little girl, off to Disney World, which I thought was wonderful. Some people think, oh, that's a waste, you should do some Oh, that was a wonderful thing to do. Take their child to Disney World. She loved it. So that was
Joe, I
great.
have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The information you just gave us about trust and will, is that in the handouts you're giving us?
To a large extent, yes. Yeah.
Great, great.
Yes.
In fact, one that I think covers a lot of these issues in some ways is the one that's entitled, "Do you really want to leave it all to your husband?"
The subtitle is An Act of Betrayal.
Yeah. And probably many of you in here have seen that happen, where the wife dies first. And it can be the other way around, but we like to pick on the guy. It's funnier when the wife dies first and leaves everything to her husband. And what do most men do as they get older, especially, or any age, I guess? Most women are not going to remarry unless they're very young, still have kids and stuff like that. Most guys are going to remarry because we don't have a lot of the life skills that women have. I know my idea of cooking. My idea of cooking, a nice 3-course meal, and it takes 4 minutes and 30 seconds to cook it in the microwave. And that's about all the effort I'm willing to put out. Men don't have the same social circles usually. I'm not the type that wants to sit around and play poker or bridge or anything like that, so I don't really socialize a lot with other guys. Women are much better at that, so they don't have that same need for somebody to be with them that a man does, often. So men are more apt to remarry, and then how long do you think it will be? I like to ask when we put on seminars, if you die first, how long do you think it'll be before your husband remarries? And we get some very comical results. Like a lot of things like that. And one said, well, hell, 2 weeks.
She knew who he was gonna marry too.
Yeah, that was another thing. I said, and who is it? Yeah. And, I should stop saying that. It's at these seminars, it might be causing problems. I'm not thinking of unintended consequences thing. But, and then the next question is, how long before he changes his will?
The next
So,
day.
one case, if they had me on speed dial, but the fastest I've seen was where a lady changed her will. It was a second marriage. 2 weeks later. Came in 2 weeks later and changed her will. I tried to talk to the man about some of this type of plan. He got mad at me. No way my wife was going to do that. I talked to both of them out. If it had been a real conflict, if I couldn't talk freely to both of them, I'd have to say I can just represent one of you, or neither one of you got to go get other attorneys, because I think there's some issues here, conflicts of interest. But I was able to talk openly to both of them, and they were both good with this. And he was a little perturbed I'd even brought that up. He was very protective of her, and a retired executive, very forceful guy, sort of scary, and by golly, she was pretty forceful herself. She came in 2 weeks later and changed it to leave his kids out. And we've all heard of stories like that, where, in fact, a relative of mine, her grandfather, was a well-known, at the time, well-known inventor in his day, fairly wealthy, and had remarried, and his wife got everything, his children got absolutely zero, not a thing. Fairly substantial fortune. And that is not just sending the money the wrong direction. He probably had no idea that's what was going to happen, because he was quite old and was losing his confidence. But the heartbreak it causes the kids to feel betrayed like that. That somebody, dad, first of all, didn't take care of them, or mom didn't take care of their affairs like they should have, or second, that person could have just as well have put a gun to my head and robbed me. You feel like you've been assaulted. So it's just a double or triple insult to the survivors. It's just a horrible thing to go through. So that's that type of planning ahead of time. There's all kinds of good reasons to do some basic planning ahead of time. Number one, in my opinion, with a will like this, now some people don't want that, and that's fine. You know, I don't sit there and argue with them and say, you really should do it this way, no. But there's so many benefits to it. I often get the question, well, how do I get money out of that trust? We set up this trust, the wife is concerned, my husband dies first, I'm the trustee, how do I get money out of it? Write a check. The bank has nothing to do with this. Fidelity Investments, Vanguard, whomever you go to, go to your broker, your investment advisor, use their company, Merrill Lynch, Ameriprise, whomever. They have nothing to do with it. Do you need their permission to write a check yourself or to make a withdrawal yourself with your own money right now? No, of course not. If wife is the trustee of this trust, nobody can tell her what to do. The bank cannot tell her what to do. She's in charge. Now, the kids can keep an eagle eye on her if she starts using this money and saving her own when she's not supposed to. She's supposed to go through her money first before she invades that trust. They can put a stop to it because she has to let them know what's going on in this trust. So if there's a children from a previous marriage, it can get a little contentious.
We got
Yes.
5 minutes, so any other questions that we can wrap up?
Okay, so the children get, like, usual, reports from that trust about the money that's come out as well as
Yes.
the trustee or the wife, then, so that they would know that she's taking money out of the trust?
Yeah, now she's obviously not gonna report this. She's not gonna self-report it. She's
Right,
not doing this honestly.
right.
So the kids have the right to look, and they passed a law, the change trust law, I don't remember when it was. I'd say just a couple of years ago, but it's probably been 15 years ago. Where the children had the right at any time to look into the bank accounts and so for the assets of this trust to see what's going on.
But they would get regular reports anyway, quarterly or yearly?
Only if she sends them. If she doesn't send them,
Oh,
she's the trustee, she's the only one with the access to it. Now, if she's not doing that, or if they notice these look pretty fake, that's not really what the bank's, that's not a bank statement, that's just made up. It's the Bernie Madoff special. They have a right to go in and challenge her. She can actually be removed by a court. Yes, sir.
Is that taxed?
Good question. The tax, a trust, an irrevocable trust. Well, this type of trust, I'm dead and gone, it is a taxable entity, has to file a tax return. The trouble with a trust for tax purposes is you reach that top tax bracket of 37%, whatever it is, for individuals, at about $14,000. Individuals don't reach that until, or a married couple doesn't reach that until over $600,000. So it's no higher tax bracket than individuals, but it's very compressed. Reach it very quickly. The nice thing is, every distribution of income to the wife, no tax is deductible by the trust. So it's not a double taxation. You don't want to pay the tax, just distribute the income. And it's not taxable there, to the trust. The trust will pick it up, the wife would pick it up as taxable income, just as if it was in her own bank account, earning interest.
When is it too late, like if I have a single parent, in assisted living, when is it too late to do a trust for her? If she's not a power of attorney, but she's not competent really to understand beyond.
Yeah,
Too late.
that gets into another seminar.
Yeah.
And there is usually a lot that can be done, even late in the game. It's not as easy if you do it way ahead of time. But, and none of us want to give our assets away too quickly. We always wait till it's too late to be ideal, because we don't know what's going to happen. But there's still a lot of planning that can be done late in the game, even for people that are already in a nursing home. spending down their money, we can usually stop that bleeding very effectively. Not 100% at that point, unless it's the very smallest amount of money, but can save like half of it easily, just with a good plan. Now, powers of attorney. It's important that that power of attorney have gifting powers. So my power of attorney, my wife can take my assets and give them away to herself and the kids, and my kids. If she can't serve them, my wife steps into they step into my wife's shoes. And they can take my assets and give them to themselves. I trust them that if I see them doing that, but I'm still confident that there's gonna be some little sit down chat about that. But let's say I am in a nursing home. I've had a horrible stroke and I'm in the nursing home. Well, I want them to be able to give away my assets for Medicaid planning purposes. They get way too complicated to get into in just a few minutes like this. But yeah, so it's important in the power of attorney. Does it have gifting powers? And you also have to be sure that agent is somebody you can trust with those gifting powers. If you have several kids, you don't want the child you know is going to be selfish and just take out stuff for themselves. So you got to have somebody who's really trustworthy and is going to do what you want. If you can't, with Medicaid planning, if you don't have anybody that's totally trustworthy like that, and it's usually children, not necessarily all of them, we just don't do the planning. There's no sense in turning power over to somebody that's very likely to steal the money or misspend it. That happens on occasion.
All right, any more questions?
How many years do you have to get the money out of your name before Medicaid will ignore you?
Okay, let's say we're talking about a living person. Let's say my wife had died and she had a will leaving everything to me. She said, I can do that too. I don't care if it's in trust. Now you spend on another woman, I don't care. I said, I care. I'm not going to betray my kids. It's going into a trust. But let's say she did leave everything to me. And I come down with dementia. See, the doctor tells me I've got Alzheimer's. I know your wife was telling you this most of your life, but now I'm confirming that you do have Alzheimer's. Just because I don't remember to do those chores I promised to do. I'd turn around then and give everything away to the kids. Well, I wouldn't give everything away to the kids, but I'd do some planning. And we do this a lot for clients. And try to guess within feedback from the clients, the kids, on what are my expenses going to be for the next 5 years. If it's in a nursing home care, it's going to be pretty heavier. Usually can't predict when am I going into the nursing home. It might be a year from now, it might be 6 years from now, we don't know. So we take a guess at how much money I need to hold, keep of my own, give the rest away. And it gets very complicated. To a trust for the kids. I'm not in that trust, it's just the kids. And some money straight out to them for reasons I won't get into. We sort of split it up between the trust and the kids. And I keep enough to last for 5 years.
5 years.
We hope. Because if I make a gift today, 5 years later, Medicaid cannot penalize that gift. How do they penalize a gift? Well, first of all, you have to apply for Medicaid or they don't care what you've done.
Something went wrong.
Second,
Please try again.
they don't take. They don't take. Well, that was a bad pocket call. You had the wrong number. They trying to make a joke and it didn't come out right now. I lost my train of thought.
5-year gift.
Yeah, they don't seize bank accounts, anything like that. They just say, we're not gonna pay. For every $5,000 you're giving away, 1 month they won't pay. So if I give away $100,000, and you have to put that down on the application. You can't. Sometimes kids, I've had families say, well, Dad's got this money in a lockbox, how will they know? I say, well, you just told your lawyer. They're gonna know. You have to put it on the form or it's a federal crime. You can go to jail for it, just like tax fraud. Aside from the fact it's a sin and immoral and all that stuff. So if I give away $100,000, divided by 5 is 20 months, it's 20 months I don't qualify. With some planning, we can get that reduced to about 10 months or even less. Again, stuff we can't get into here. I think we're about to start putting on more seminars again. COVID put a stop to all the seminars we used to do. And I think we need to pick that up again.
Well, thank you
Sure.
very much.
Thank you very much.